a little bit about Hallie. Hallie is an Atlanta-based certified career coach and national career expert. Her company is HallieCrawford.com, and she and her team of coaches have helped thousands of people worldwide to identify and transition to their dream career, effectively navigate their job search, and enhance their performance at work. She's regularly featured as a career expert in the media, including U.S. News, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, CNN, and Fox Business News. She has a bachelor's and master's degree in communications, and you can read more about Hallie at her website, www.HallieCrawford.com. So welcome, Hallie, and thank you again for offering so generously to provide this webinar to our Cornell Embas. And with that, Hallie, you are on.
Thank you so much, Liz, and Diane in the background too. Greatly appreciate being here today. It's truly my pleasure. I absolutely love what I do, and we do hope that all of you are staying safe and healthy during this crazy time, and we all just need to stay as calm and as patient with things as possible. So thrilled to be here with you all today. We're going to be talking about how to improve your conflict competence and improve your conflict management skills, so to speak. And as Liz said, we will be recording this, so you'll get that afterwards. Let's take a look at, first of all, on this next slide here, why this is important in the first place. Why is it important? Why do we want to be better at or get better at managing conflict in the workplace specifically? There are several different reasons, all the way to, it just causes us as professionals a lot of stress, obviously. But a couple of statistics on this slide here that I really think are important to share and know, because it shows us how much conflict can impact work performance and a manager's day throughout the course of the day and the week as well. That research shows that between 60 to 80% of the difficulties in organizations, they actually come from strained relationships or conflict versus deficits in, an employee's performance, skill, or their motivation. That's a big percentage. And a typical manager can spend between 25 to 40% of their time dealing with workplace conflicts. And this is a lot. That's 1 to 2 days of every work week. So it's obviously something that is not good for us, emotionally, physically as employees, but it also impacts the organization as well enormously. The second reason why this is important is, if you take a look on this next slide, this is our ideal career model. This is the model that I developed after having done this, being a career coach for over 19 years now. And early on, I developed a model to help provide a framework for our clients to help them understand what they needed to consider in order to know if they're in the right career fit, choose the right career direction, but also help them more effectively establish their career goals. And if you take a look at this slide here, it's pointing to the work environment. Work environment for all of us, and the culture and environment of the organization that we're in, it really is a make or break for your job satisfaction. It's a very big deal. I can't tell you how many clients have come to us and, said, gosh, I should go be a chef or something completely different from what they're doing, for example, as a business consultant. And when it comes down to it at the end of the day, after we work with them and help them really kind of pick apart what's going on, it's the work environment so many times that is the problem for them with their career. So work environment really is a big deal, and having conflict in the workplace, obviously this contributes enormously to how good the work environment is or not. So it's a make or break, something that we need to learn how to manage more effectively. So fast forward 19 years later, when I was first starting out as a coach, this is our website today. And I did want to share with you all just one quick thing related to the coronavirus and every way that this is impacting us professionally. I wanted to let you all know that on our website, we are really trying to post a lot of timely, relevant information about how to work from home more effectively, how to manage your schedule with school and everything else. as well as, job seeking and all of that. If you take a look at the top here on our career blog, please feel free to visit that. We are posting a lot of, trying to help people as much as possible by posting a lot of relevant, pertinent information to help you guys out with whatever is going on in your world career-wise. So please do connect with me on LinkedIn because we are posting content to help people there as well, and on our website too. All right, I just wanted to share that because we know this can be a very tough time for us personally, but also professionally as well. So here's our agenda for today. We are going to be talking about several things. So we're going to talk about some coaching skills that we want you all to understand and that will help you get better at managing conflict. We're going to talk about how to make agreements with coworkers in your lives and, even your supervisor and even employees in some cases as well on how to manage conflict more effectively. The three main tips or advice or tools that we'll give you are going to be talking about creating an agreement, empathic communication based on empathy, obviously, and then also leveraging and using curiosity as a way to diffuse conflict, but also come to a better understanding of where the other person is coming from. We will share with you some resources to assist you in this journey, and we do want you to walk away today with some action items that you can take, tangible action items you can take in the next several weeks to help you improve managing conflict. There is a handout available. I'm not sure, I believe it might be in the chat feature. We'll let Liz or Diane speak to that closer to the end of when we're doing Q&A here today. But just know that there is a handout available and we can always send that to you afterwards as well. So this is our basic agenda for today. And we did want to launch right into our first poll if we could. We're curious about what are your most common obstacles for effectively managing conflict? And I know we probably, all of us, have all of these, at least to a certain extent, but which one stands out for you the most? If we could do this first poll, that would be great. Which obstacle most applies to you? Do you fall in the category of, gosh, I just avoid it completely because it makes me anxious, I don't feel like I have time for it, whatever it is? Is it, you just get really anxious thinking about it in the first place? Or is part of why you're here today because you don't know how to effectively handle conflict? And we totally get if any of these are the case for you. Thank you guys for participating in this. It's great. All right, awesome. So we look like, so far at least, we've got a relatively even split between I get anxious thinking about it, but the majority, it looks like so far, I just don't know how to handle it effectively, which is perfect why you're here. And we will be talking about ways in order to prepare for these kinds of possibly conflict-ridden conversations that will help you kind of manage that anxiety a little bit more, okay? So perfect, thank you guys for sharing this. This is perfect. Let's take a look at, if we could, our next slide here. And just please know too, in terms of these obstacles, everybody, I personally feel all of these things. I totally understand how it feels to experience, the wanting to avoid it, or it makes you anxious and all of that. And honestly, just being really transparent about it, I don't think anyone is ever going to say, like, I feel totally comfortable dealing with this all the time, or even like I enjoy it. And that's normal. Just please know it's not going to be perfect, but we're going to give you some tools today that will help it be a lot better than it has been. So to manage conflict more effectively, some of the things that we need to be mindful of is we need to be mindful of developing a greater foundation. It will help us manage conflict more effectively if we develop a greater foundation of trust and empathy with people. So let me pull a couple of these up here on the slide here. So our first two things that we want to be thinking about in order to manage conflict more effectively is one of our goals is not just to end the conflict, obviously that's part of it, and kind of compromise during the course of it. But ideally, we want to develop a greater foundation of trust between the two of you, a greater sense of empathy between the two of you as well, because that will help manage conflict more effectively in the future as well. Develop a greater sense of the ability to be honest with each other and have an effective feedback loop, if you will. And then finally, a greater understanding between the two of you that will come about if you develop greater listening skills, if you both do. So in order to manage conflict more effectively, you need to have these foundational items in place more and develop those more in order to manage conflict more effectively. So keep this in mind, that these are kind of some of your main goals in the foundation that you want to create. Some of our foundational tools that we're going to be talking about today are creating an agreement, empathic listening, like we said, and leveraging curiosity in order to manage the conflict more effectively as well and work through it. So let's talk about our first tool to manage conflict, and this is creating an agreement. And this goes for if your relationship with someone else professionally is brand new, or even if it's not brand new and you're in the middle of it and you're in the middle of the conflict, I just want you all to know that you can take a step back and say, hey, look, instead of talking about like the content right now, can we talk about how we can manage this whole thing, this whole conflict or issue a little bit more effectively together to put some ground rules in place? So if you take a look at this next slide here, creating an agreement is one of the first tools that is really, really helpful to help you both get through and manage the conflict more effectively. What we would recommend is that your agreement or discussion about creating this agreement together would include the items on this slide as a start. Both of you establishing and talking through, if you will, guidelines for communication. How can we communicate more effectively? Do we need to talk about some of this touchy stuff over the phone or video chat versus via email, for example? If a conflict is, escalating, then I would say take it offline and get over even video chat so that you can see each other's nonverbals. That will help as well. Do you need to establish some more clear guidelines about how you handle tasks effectively together? What's the difference between the tasks that you're supposed to be, tackling, and are you guys stepping on each other's toes in this way? And do you need to establish improved guidelines for your meetings as well? We would also recommend you discuss the roles that you each play in the project or the task that you're working on for greater clarity, because sometimes conflict arises because there's role confusion, so to speak. You're not really sure who's supposed to be doing what. So you want to make sure that that is very clear as well. Finally, make an agreement together for how to handle conflict more effectively and disagreements and feedback as well. Does the other person, for example, prefer to get a quick email from you saying, hey, I'm struggling with this is frustrating me, whatever it is, because perhaps they're more introverted and they want to think about it and have time to think about it before discussing it? Are you the type of person that, for example, is more extroverted and you just want to get right into it, but you realize from having this conversation that the other person would like to have an email first so they can kind of noodle on things a little bit more? Does it need to be handled via phone? Does it need to be handled both? So agreements about how to handle this more effectively up front, or taking a step back and saying, hey, how should we talk about this more effectively? When you have this conversation with them, we recommend ask them their opinion first, to invite that conversation and establish that trust and invite honesty and transparency and everything else. Don't just bulldoze right into the conversation. Ask them how they think you all can manage this more effectively. But also at the same time, have suggestions. Don't just leave it all up to them to have all of the ideas, of course. Have suggestions about what you think might be more effective and what might work. The way you can open up this conversation in a non-confrontational way to discuss this type of agreement, if you will, is you can say, look, I'd like to talk about how we can work together more effectively, or how we can get through this conflict a little bit more collaboratively, because I feel like it's escalating and I'd like to be productive with this. Are you available later today or tomorrow, for example, to have a phone call and even a video chat so we can try to work through this step by step? Ask it as a question, kind of asking permission to set this up, and then have that conversation about what the agreements are so you can establish these guidelines. Some additional agreements that we would highly recommend to prevent conflict in the future, but also manage it more effectively, is be clear about and have an agreement about what your objectives are in working together, what the tasks are that you're trying to perform, so that you each are very clear about those things. Again, the roles that you should each play, yes, but make sure the roles that you have established for each other are based on your strengths, so that the other person or you're not trying to do something that you're just naturally not good at, and that's part of what's creating the conflict or frustration. Talk in advance about the challenges that you have encountered in the past and may encounter in the future, so that you're more prepared for them. And then also make sure that you all discuss the milestones. How are we going to know that we're being successful here? And both make sure that you're on the same page there. We'd love to get this next poll set up if we could. Our second poll is basically, how many of you on the call today have ever made an agreement like this with someone in advance on how to handle conflict or possible issues? Really curious about this. Hopefully the numbers are good, but if not, that's okay, because obviously that's why we're here today. It's looking about evenly split so far. And again, what I wanted to remind you all is, yes, obviously in an ideal world, we would have dealt with this before the conflict even happened, and we came up with kind of these guidelines or agreements. That would be fantastic. But even if you are in the throes of a conflict right now, I do want you all to know that it is recommended and okay to take a step back and say, look, let's talk about how we can deal with this more productively. Because I feel like, for example, you know, things are getting kind of tense and difficult, and I'd like to take a step back here. So 60% are no, 40% are yes. Thank you for launching that poll, and everyone for participating in it. That's perfect. So like we said, in an ideal world, this is in advance, but doesn't have to be necessarily, okay? So the reason why creating these agreements are so good is it will help you improve the communication when these come up and even during the course of it, okay? So the communication that we want you to consider around this creating an agreement tool or step is when you're handling this kind of touchy conversation and you're getting right into it in the moment, the ideal ways to do this are at the top of the slide here. First of all, you want to set the tone of the conversation before you start. So you can say something like, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this today. I really appreciate it because I do want to work through this together as much as we possibly can. Set the tone, let them know that we're in this together. We're on the same page. I want to work through this, and I'm open to doing so. Number two is to let them know that you need to talk about something touchy in advance. So for example, if part of this agreement conversation that you need to have that is going to involve you giving them some feedback that they may not like to hear very much, or maybe a little bit awkward for you to share, let them know in advance and ask them permission to do so. So this is 2 and 3 on the slide here. You can say something simple like, you know, I've got some feedback that I really feel like I need to share with you, but I don't want to step on your toes. I don't want to offend you. And it may be a little bit difficult to hear, but I really feel like I need to share it. Is that okay with you? Is that okay to do that in this moment right now? Ask permission before doing so, and that will help diffuse the situation. It'll help them drop their guard a little bit because you're not catching them off guard completely by bulldozing into it. And then after you share, number 4 here on the slide at the top, after you share what your feedback is, let them talk for a minute. Give them some space to share anything that they have to say or provide any feedback to what you've said. Let them talk. And what I sometimes will do with clients, when I know that they need to get something off their chest or share something important, in order to develop that empathy and that understanding and giving them that, airtime, if you will, in that safe space, I literally will just hold my hand over my mouth for just a second so that I remind myself to remain quiet, to let them to speak. So let them talk after you share. The next kind of section in terms of effective communication during the course of these kinds of conversations are the body language, and you need to pay attention to your body language here. You want to make sure that you're making good eye contact with them, even if it's over video chat. That's going to show them that you're listening. You want to nod a little bit to show that understanding and empathy, that you get what they're saying and you're listening. Leaning forward a little bit to let them know that you're listening as well is positive and helpful. And sometimes when we get frustrated, I know this can happen with me, when I get anxious or frustrated, sometimes I can start to wave my hands around a little bit. And I think that can come across in the wrong way. It depends on the conversation. But just be mindful of what you're doing with your hands. They may need to be in your lap or somewhere else so that you, again, show them that you're really listening and not getting too flustered or anxious, okay? If that's the case for you. The reason why creating agreement can be so helpful is because it will improve our professional relationships. Because if you do it as a two-way conversation, which is part of why we talked about asking them questions throughout the whole conversation, but at the very beginning as well, because you do that, or when you do that, it empowers each of you to take responsibility for the end result. It's just not this one-way thing where you're supposed to fix it or they are. You're empowering each of you to do so. It establishes clearer boundaries for a safe space for you all to talk about touchy stuff if you need to, because you've discussed it in advance or at least established some of these guidelines to kind of get yourselves back on track. It creates ground rules for you all to follow so that you can kind of fall back on these ground rules versus wondering what each of you needs to do and, you know, how to handle it. So it creates that clarity there. And then finally, we do recommend that you update these agreements periodically as needs and situations and even projects change, because we want these things to be dynamic and create agreements with each person as needed in your professional life as well, so that you can change and update things as appropriate. Let's talk about tool number 2, and this is empathic listening. Most people feel like they're really good listeners, and we find that not everyone knows naturally how to really listen very well, how to express empathy really well, and also how to show understanding. So these are always things that can obviously help with conflict. And 2 things that we obviously know here: everything in the workplace involves communication. It's such a big deal. It's a make or break for our effectiveness in so many ways. And we have to keep in mind, especially during conflict, that two-way communication is essential. It's absolutely critical. So we would recommend that you start to note these on your handout, or just take notes if you've got a piece of paper in front of you, whatever is best. So we have 3 levels of listening in coaching that we leverage and teach our clients. Level 1 listening and 2, they're both on this slide here. Level 1 is internal listening, listening to our own inner voice. It can be anything from our opinion about something, ooh, why is this person saying that? Our judgment about them, and gosh, they're getting really frustrated or they're annoying me, whatever is going on. And it could also be about our needs. I'm hungry, this sounds hard, whatever it is. It's a thinking about what you want to say next. This is the one that we fall into the trap of the most. You're preparing what you want to say next to them versus really listening and being still and quietly processing what they're saying. Level 1 listening, we need it sometimes, but we don't want to stay in that as much as possible. We want to move into and be in level 2 and 3 listening. Level 2 listening, bottom of the slide here, is what we call focus listening. It's focused on the other person. It's listening to each thing that they're saying, but also, by the way, the nuances and the nonverbal communication that they're giving us. The things that they may not be saying to us as much, that they may be kind of holding back, that, by the way, we may need to call out a little bit in order to manage the conflict more effectively. If they're just trying to appease us, that's not going to work. We need to have as open of a conversation as we possibly can. Level 3 listening is we want you to be in levels 2 and 3, like we said. Level 3 listening is what we call global listening. It's the energy between the 2 of you, how it's changing, the shifts in attitude, the mood or tone of the conversation. And the way that we want you to do this, and we can go ahead and launch our 3rd and last poll for today, if we could, that'd be great. Do you believe you have really effective listening skills based on the definition that we have presented today? Okay, this global listening is something that you really need to pay attention to. It's listening to our intuition. It's listening to the things, or kind of looking out for the things that they may not be saying to us. And the way that we want you all to do this is to be quiet, still your body, calm yourself down a little bit, because when we get anxious in conflict, we're not in level 3 listening anymore. We're usually paying attention to how anxious we feel. And one of the ways to really do this more effectively, everyone, is to just flat out slow down your conversation and your talking, and slow down the conversation between the two of you. Take your time with it, because managing conflict is not this quick fix. Usually it can take a couple of meetings in order to really get through whatever it is. So we're really glad that most people feel like they do have these effective listening skills. 52 and 48%. Thank you all for participating in that. That's perfect. One of the tools and skills we want you to develop a little bit more of is just literally slowing yourself down. And also, instead of giving advice, telling them what you think you should do, asking a question for greater understanding. So practice asking more questions as opposed to talking. This will help with the understanding, help the other person be able to vent and kind of get things off their chest, but also help the two of you come up with the compromise that you need to come up with together. We did want to share with you, there's this really good, we like this a lot because it's just a very simple, active, empathic listening scale. It's easy to fill out, takes 2 seconds. We'd be happy to share that with you. Just feel free to email us at admin@halliecrawford.com. We'll share that with you. You can complete it just in a couple minutes. And what we would recommend is identifying your 2 lowest areas of where you may not be as good of a listener as you thought. And those are the areas that you need to be working on, okay? And then the second exercise that we would highly recommend is doing what we would call an active listening exercise with a friend or family member. Have them tell you a problem that they're struggling with, something they're comfortable sharing with you. And you are only allowed to reflect what they say back to you and paraphrase it as well. And if you need to tell them in advance you're practicing a listening exercise, go for it. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But we find it's so interesting that we find with our clients that, we just naturally as humans, we want to fix and help people. And that's, that comes from a good place. We get that. But as a result of that, sometimes we don't take enough time to really understand where someone else is coming from. So to do this practicing of only reflecting back and paraphrasing something or paraphrasing what someone else has said is actually a really hard exercise. So we encourage you to try this out so that you can really see how that feels to stretch and develop that muscle. Also, as part of empathic listening and this tool, we wanted to share with you this model of the 4 needs of followers that we find is incredibly helpful with our clients to help us understand what our needs are in conflict, what we need to get out of the resolution, as well as what the other person's needs are. This is the 4 needs of followers. The items in the middle, trust, compassion, stability, and hope, those are the main core needs that everyone has in terms of being, quote unquote, a follower of an organization. And this goes from, anyone within the organization all the way up to, the CEO. They are a follower to a certain extent of that organization. We all as professionals want to have a sense of trust in our coworkers, trust in our boss, trust in our organization, at least to a certain extent. We all want to have a sense of stability, that things are going to be okay, especially during times like we are in now, where stability can feel so shaky for so many different reasons. We want to have a sense of compassion and enjoyment in what we do work-wise, and compassion from our fellow coworkers and our supervisor. And we all want to have a sense of hope, faith and guidance, or sense of direction within our organization as well. So the reason why we show this to you today is because this is a model that can help you understand better where the other person is coming from and what might be missing for them. Are they freaked out because they don't have a sense of stability from something that you have done, or just from the way things are in the world right now? Do you all just have no trust between the two of you, and you need to talk about how can we establish greater trust between the two of us? Is it this sense of hope or compassion, whatever is going on? This will help you if you take a look on this next slide here. This model can help you understand what your highest needs are and what may be being stepped on that is creating this conflict for you both. And it will also help you understand as well, is the conflict a clash of values or priorities based on these 4 needs or based on something else? So one of the things that we wanted to point out to you all today is that conflict can come from so many different places. It can come from someone being just flat out stressed out and frustrated. It could have nothing to do with things at work. It could be in their personal lives and it's bleeding in. It could be something work-wise, though, that's a clash of their professional values and yours. You may just see things in a completely different way, and you need to talk about, this is how I see this project or task. How do you see it? And just having that conversation could help you all both see, gosh, we're coming at this from completely different places. And we want to make sure that you all understand when you're thinking about conflict, what your values are and what values may be getting stepped on, and that's part of what's creating the conflict, and understanding what their values are as well. Understanding what your hot buttons are, what kind of tends to get you a little bit riled up, what gets you frustrated, typically if it's lack of organization or something else. Understanding and even writing down what your hot buttons typically tend to be is a great exercise so that you can understand that, oh, this is what I need to be mindful of because that could create conflict for me. Understanding what your values are and your highest needs are and what's going on for you currently in your professional life is very helpful as well, because this will help you and allow you to ask for what you need and work towards a compromise with them by understanding what their needs are as well. The other reason why we wanted to bring up values in these hot buttons, and then we'll get to our last tool here, our third tool in just a moment, but understanding these will also help you with your self-management. So when you understand what your hot buttons are and what tends to get you kind of riled up, or what your values are and how important they are to you, you'll be able to manage your work life a little bit better around that. And also, you'll be able to understand, okay, how do I need to get these needs met in order to move forward and come to a resolution for this conflict, okay? So let's talk about tool number 3, our third tool to help you improve your conflict management is going to be leveraging this muscle, if you will, of curiosity. What do we mean by, curiosity in the case that we're talking about today when it relates to conflict? So first of all, leveraging and using curiosity, being curious versus being quick to judge the other person or quick to anger or frustration will absolutely help diffuse a conflict. And I know this may sound kind of crazy, but this is curiosity as a tool for coaches is a huge one. So instead of us getting into the muck, if you will, or the difficulty that a client may be having, we are trained as coaches to be more curious and ask the right questions, okay? And let me actually pull all of these up here to give you some examples too, so you can see what we're talking about. So we are trained as coaches to ask curious questions in order to help us with our own self-management, but also as part of that, allow the other person to understand where they're coming from a little bit more, and you develop greater understanding for where they're coming from too. So this being curious versus judging or anger can help diffuse a conflict in a difficult situation. We already talked about this first item on the slide here. Ask permission before sharing something that could be touchy or difficult. But the other thing that we want you to consider using during a conflict is what we would call powerful questions. Powerful questions are open-ended questions. They tend to be kind of childlike. They're not yes or no. They don't require a yes or no answer or allow for that. There's no judgment in them, and they just allow the other person to talk for a few minutes, explain where they're coming from, or even identify a solution. So if you look at the very bottom of the slide here, you'll see that both of these examples are not yes or no questions. And they also, by the way, the other important thing we want you to notice is they assume a positive outcome. How can we improve our professional relationship? What's the best way to accomplish this goal without conflict? How can we work through this conflict more effectively, do you think? So it assumes a positive outcome, and it's not a yes or no question. You might think that these are easy, but it's very interesting when we do workshops live with hundreds of people and we have them practice these powerful questions. It's so fun and interesting to watch people start to ask a question, and then kind of halfway through the question, they start to realize, ooh, this is going to be a yes or no type of question. So I need to kind of backtrack for a second and really think about my question more effectively. This is a great thing to practice, again, with your friends and family members when we're talking about that exercise before. Powerful questions can be two types, just by the way. They can be information gathering or curious, just flat out open, very open-ended and curious. A couple of examples are on this slide here. What are your priorities regarding this issue? What's most important to you here? Or what is being stepped on that's causing the frustration for you? A curious question would be, what would working together effectively look like to you, in your opinion? What would be the best outcome for you? What would that be? Okay. So in terms of curiosity, we also want to keep in mind, as we talked about before with the values, we want you to leverage curiosity because in some cases, this can help you with your self-management. It will help you get out of judgment or frustration with this person. It will help you work towards understanding first, empathizing, and then asking questions, okay, versus getting quick to your hot buttons being pushed all over the place, okay? And then finally, with this curiosity piece, and then we'll start to move towards our Q&A portion of our call today, our basic effective assertive communication formula that we train our clients on is shown on this slide here at the bottom here, these 3 basic steps. The way to effectively, assertively, not being passive and being a doormat, still being assertive, but being effective doing so, to communicate with someone in this way is always to first show understanding. This will go light years in effectiveness. I just can't tell you enough how important it is to show understanding. And what I want to point out to you all, though, is this doesn't mean you agree with them. This doesn't mean that you think that they're right and that you're going to go with exactly what they're saying, but you can at least show understanding as a human being to whatever it is they might be thinking or feeling or whatever is going on for them, okay? And that will help enormously get to a better place. Then you want to, number 2, is to state the facts. Leave the emotions out of it and state the facts about this happened, this is what's going on, and here's what I feel like or think that we should do. What do you think? And then that, obviously, that 3rd step is offering a resolution. We want you to ask them if they have an idea for a resolution, just like we talked about earlier, so that you're inviting this two-way street communication. But we want you to be able to offer a resolution as well. And if you have to come up with a compromise, okay, that's fine. That's exactly what you want. We want you to be considering doing. If any of you, as we start to move towards the action steps that we want you all to take as a result of being here today, and then we'll move to our Q&A as well. If any of you feel like, gosh, my situation is really unique and specific, and you would like some more specific advice about this situation, whether it's something related to conflict or anything else related to your career, I'd be happy to offer you all a free career strategy session to talk about this further and give you advice on any career goal that you need some assistance with. Feel free to just email us at admin@halliecrawford.com. We'll send you a link to my calendar to get that set up. And by the way, too, if any of you have questions that you think of later on, you know, in the next couple of weeks or whatever it is, that we don't get to today because you haven't thought of it or we just don't have time for today, please don't hesitate to email us at the same email address. We would be happy to answer, just by the way.
Hallie,
all right, so yes.
Thank you so much for your generosity in conducting this webinar. We do have a few questions. If you
Awesome.
are ready, I will pose them to you.
Absolutely.
The first one that came in is, what do you suggest if the person you have conflict with will only communicate via email or text?
Sure. So what I would suggest in this situation is you could say, okay, look, you know, like you could absorb whatever it is they've said to you in an email, and you can write them back and say, you know, look, here are my thoughts and suggestions about how we should handle this. You can try it a little bit given using the same tools we're talking about today, but ask them the questions via email instead. This, in my opinion, just via email is not ideal though. So if it's not becoming resolved, let's say, or you guys aren't making progress over the next like 2 or 3 emails, then I would, ask them and request, look, can we talk about this over the phone for a few minutes? I really feel like, it would make a big difference, and see if you can, at the very minimum, get them on the phone for a few minutes.
Thank you, Hallie. Another question. I work in a high pressure work environment and just moved to a new role in a new team. I realize with every passing day that I struggle getting in my thoughts in any calls with the new team. No matter how much I try, there's a collective habit of cutting off and speaking louder. How do I handle this situation?
So I'm going to make the assumption in my answer that you are part of the team versus the supervisor. So a couple of things. I would get my thoughts collected in advance of the meeting and actually write some things down that you have with you before you get on that call. And I wouldn't try to fit in and say, oh, I want to get 5 things in. Let's shoot for just 1 or 2 at the beginning, since this is such a problem. I would email whomever is in charge of that meeting in advance and say, I really need to get these couple of, points across. What is a good time to do so, to try to get yourself on the agenda? And then if people continue to cut you off during that time, I would say something in the chat and say, I need to point again to the person who's running the meeting. I need to point something out. And if you are talking and at that time someone is interrupting you, I personally feel it's completely acceptable to say, if you could hold on for just 1 second, I have one more thing I need to share about this. It's really important. Those are some quick basic tools to start.
Thanks, Hallie. Here's another question having to do with timing. Sometimes this listener struggles with managing the timing with conflict. When's a good time to bring up these tools? I've experienced after conflict, people may need some time to cool off, but also some feel more time may stir the heat of conflict.
Sure, I would give it overnight, like give it a day, give or take, and then try to have the conversation the next day, within the next couple of days. I think longer than that, it either could make it worse, or then it's not as timely and people don't remember what actually happened. So for me, kind of a general rule of thumb is do try to address things within about 48 hours.
Thank you, Hallie. Next question. What about when there is not an outright conflict? What if there's an underlying conflict? Sometimes it's hard to confront people about passive-aggressive behavior.
Sure. This is where, great question, where I would ask more questions and invite the person, see if you can get them to share a little bit about what's actually going on underneath. If you can't do that and it's not working or not helping, then I would say, I hope it's okay to share something with you, but I keep having this gut instinct that you are frustrated with, or you might be, whatever it is going on. And see if pointing it out can help get them to speak up a little bit more. If things get really, really difficult, and this is for everyone, remember that in some cases having a third party may be required to get this fixed, whether it's someone from HR or your supervisor. But for this specific question, those are the things I would start with.
Great. We have several more questions. This is really stirring a lot of engagement, which is fabulous. What do you do when the other person does not hold up the contract, but seems to have excuses to avoid accountability?
Talk with them about that and go back to the contract and say, okay, so you might let it slip or slide for 2 times, let's say. And then the 3rd time you might say, hey, can I chat with you for a few minutes? Please don't be defensive or offended by this. But I did want to talk with you about, we made this agreement about this, this, and this. Is everything okay? Are you doing okay? This has happened. How can we fix this? Is there anything I need to do to help you? Going in it with, hey, let's work on this and fix this together is going to come across a lot more effectively, if you will, just to kind of launch into it a little bit. That will be a good start, I guess I should say.
Okay, great. Thank you. How would you deal with your manager or supervisor who is not a good listener when it comes to conflict management?
Great question. So when you're meeting with them or having a conversation, try as often as possible to have an agenda, and even better, send them the agenda in advance, so that then you're kind of forcing the issue a little bit, like, hey, here are the 3 things I need to talk about. Is this good by you? And that just naturally, having an agenda tends to force people a little bit more to go line by line and actually, listen to what you're saying. I would make sure that you both have enough time set up for that meeting or conversation in order to get to each thing. And then if you feel like they're not truly like listening deeply to, and if there's a particular point that you need to get across, I would be okay with saying, does that make sense? And do you have any feedback or thoughts on that? To try to force them a little bit to like listen to what's going on and give you some input.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're just getting warmed up here, so we have a few more. Are there any specific adjustments or recommendations for applying these strategies across age groups? And what if the top boss does not believe in these tools?
Oh, that's a good question, and can be tough if the top boss doesn't agree. So in terms of age groups, I do think and feel very strongly actually that all of these tools are relevant. What you have to keep in mind though, for example, that the younger generation, the talking slowly is probably going to be a little bit more frustrating for them, and they're going to expect probably to get things handled faster and want to just, get it done and move on. So explain to them why you're doing things. And this part of the answer goes across generations. Let them know, like, hey, I wanted to talk this through, and I may be talking a little bit slower or whatever. I just want to be really mindful and thoughtful about this. So explain to them why you're doing each thing, and providing context across generations, across the board, will help them understand what's going on and why you're doing it. If the top boss doesn't agree with these tools, that's a little bit difficult. You can do your best to try to model this behavior. I truly believe that you can't change other people, but sometimes in some cases you can ask them questions and try to model that behavior as best as possible. Worst case scenario, try to model that for your own team and within your own team. And honestly, if it's that bad and very difficult, long-term, it may not be the right fit job-wise.
Okay, thank you, Hallie. Now this one is about managing somebody else. If you're managing someone that is apathetic about engaging on possible issues, but you see some signs of conflict, how do you suggest gaining their support?
I would use the powerful questions example to ask them, how they're doing, how do they feel about this project, what do they think about it, whatever it is the subject matter is. To try to engage them a little bit more and force them to get engaged in the whole thing and think about what their preferences might be. In a way, if they're a little bit more apathetic about it, like that could be a good thing in that they're not going to get worked up, and conflict will be less likely to be created. But again, I would try to understand them, what is important to them, what their motivations and priorities are, because that can help you get them engaged.
Okay, this question is related with a slight twist. How would you deal with defensive employees, always has an excuse, when trying to find an effective agreement?
Ask them questions, like we said, about what's important to them and what they think about, the priorities, et cetera, et cetera. But if they're getting defensive, call that out a little bit in a gentle way and say, are you okay? Like, I'm sorry, did I step on your toes? Did I say something that offended you? So in my book, it's okay to apologize, like in advance, just briefly, if they're getting frustrated or defensive, because that will help them become less defensive. And then just ask them gently, is everything okay? Did I say something that offended you? I really want to, try to work through this as much as possible. And if they're just continuing to get defensive and you need to take a break, you can say, how about we take a break? Let's think about these few questions overnight, and then let's revisit tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. We'll try and get if no more questions come in, I think we can address all of them if they're quick. If conflict comes up in a peer group setting, do you handle the situation immediately or ask to speak to the person privately?
Speak to them privately.
Okay, that's
Don't bring it up in front of everyone.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, good. This person wrote in, I love the phrase productive friction is encouraged, which my old boss once said. It solved so many things in my career and brought us as a team forward in terms of solutions. What is your take on that?
I think it's great as long as it's productive is the key word, right? So conflict, a coach told me a long time ago that when you step on people's toes, it actually is an opportunity in so many ways to create greater connection and a better relationship with that person too. So conflict actually doesn't have to be this quote unquote bad thing. It can give us so many opportunities to improve what we're doing, whether it's new ideas or, hey, we get to know each other better and therefore our relationship is better and now we have this agreement. So I'm all for it. I think it's great.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do you have any tips, Hallie, on moving forward if one person is deliberately hostile, such as shouting and talking over people because they feel that any compromise is a sign of weakness?
To me, that's borderline, just it's very inappropriate behavior. Shouting and doing that kind of thing is just unacceptable. And I was going to say borderline abusive. I think that word is a little bit too strong, but it's not okay. And if that's the case and you can't pull the person aside, outside of the room and ask them to calm down and try to get them to calm down or leave the room and come back when they are calmer, that definitely, I think, would require a third party, and you would probably need to get HR involved. If that's continuing behavior, definitely need to get some help there.
Okay, thanks, Hallie. How would you deal with time management when these discussions and effective listening become time-consuming and burdensome versus productive?
Sure. This is where go into it with an agenda. Again, if you know this person is like this, they tend to be kind of chatty. Go in with your agenda and say, look, we've got about this amount of time, and I'd like to try to cover all of these points within this time. While we're talking, is it okay if I have a question I need to ask you, or, if I think we need to move to the next point, is it okay if I say that to you, even if it's interrupting you a little bit? Is it okay if I guide our conversation a little bit? Ask them that, make that agreement right then and there.
Okay. So I have a question for you myself. What do you do with people who really seem to enjoy conflict?
I know they're out there, right? Definitely is true. I would just try to rein them in terms of having it be productive, so you can say, your ideas, some of these ideas that you're sharing, they're great and I appreciate your questions because it's really making us think about this. So how do we turn this, some of your comments and suggestions, how can we turn this into, what are our next action steps? So just try to move them. I know it can feel like herding cats sometimes, but try to move them in the direction of making it quote unquote productive. So, oh, great. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, that's something we need to consider. Okay, so how do we, wrap this up in a bow, and what do we do in terms of action items based on what you're saying?
Okay,
so just
great.
Get in there and, ask them to wrap it up, basically. Yep.
So this will be the last question, and then we will thank you heartily. Here's a question. With this guidance in mind, is there anything different that would be different in handling personal versus professional relationships, or the same tools applicable equally with both business and personal?
For the most part, I think personal, or they are applicable in both. And I just pulled up my contact information too, just to have it there. I think they are applicable in both, but remember, personal relationships, emotions are going to come into play in a completely different way. And also in personal relationships, people may have a little bit more of an agenda for you than a professional relationship. They're going to maybe want you to do something because you're in a relationship with them that could be completely different, from a professional. But overall, I think these are great tools for personal as well. So it goes across the board in my book.
Great. Thank you. I want to really express thanks to all of you listeners on the call, and especially because of the level of active engagement. It makes it so much better for people delivering the webinar when they know that people have been actively listening and engaged and curious and have questions. So thank you again. I want to extend a pre-welcome to members of the new class who we haven't even met yet, but the Career Development Office will be very much looking forward to meeting you and supporting you as you go through your MBA process. And if the current students have not had a recent career coaching session, please remember that we are out there. Our links are on Canvas, and we invite you to engage with us regardless of the topic, whether it is career, managing your career, or situations that you're currently encountering at work, be they COVID related or not. We love to hear from you. We love to work with you. So again, thank you to Diane for managing the back end of this process so gracefully, as she always does. And Hallie, thank you so much for the second webinar that you've conducted. And I want to remind people who came on late that the 10 coaching skills for leaders webinar is available on Canvas. So if you missed that live, you can go back and listen to that. Thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful, safe weekend, and we hope to engage with you further. Take care.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Take care.